in the Hebrew perspective. Not, you know, come into the Messiah and do whatever you want or just follow a few laws. But he's actually trying to get them to keep some of these commandments that I'm bringing up today.
So when Paul says, how is it that you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews, that was a good thing?
Yes.
Okay.
But the thing is, it's bad because once these Jews come, he's getting away from the Gentiles and he's not sticking to what he's been taught. Like she's saying, coming by faith. So you're not really making any converts. You're trying to get them to change their laws, to change their behavior, to change their what they eat, what they don't eat, their statutes, their morality. You're trying to do it, but once we come, you draw away from them, and you fear more of these people. So you're being a hypocrite. You're speaking with one tongue. You're speaking one thing, but you're behaving another way. So you can't really make a real good convert because now your testimony's messed up. Now your witness is messed up, and these Gentiles are, you know, it's not helping them.
May I tell you what I think it means?
Sure.
Yeah, I think there are 3 different interpretations. Absolutely.
Cephas or Peter had been in Antioch, and he had been living like the Gentiles, meaning, practically speaking, he was not keeping such matters as well, he was eating with Gentiles for one thing, which is something Jews wouldn't do, but he had given up the keeping of the law of Moses as such. However, when brethren from James arrived on the scene, well, as it says in verse 12, he withdrew and held himself aloof, fearing the party of the circumcision. So Paul sees that he's being hypocritical, because here Peter before had been happy to live like a Gentile, such as not keeping, not only associating with Gentiles, but not keeping the dietary laws of the law of Moses. But now these Jewish brethren from James arrive on the scene, and now he wants to give them the impression that he's towing the line. Okay. And Paul confronts him about that and says, you know, how can you, you know, live like the Gentile, you being a Jew, live like the Gentiles, but now you're expecting the Gentile brethren to live like the Jews. That's hypocritical. So that's essentially it. But let me say this. You know, there's an old principle that is called Occam's Razor. And Occam's Razor says that, you know, the simplest answer is usually the right answer, or something to that effect. And, you know, I'm listening to you try to give your explanation in such a way, of course, that it conforms to your beliefs about keeping the law of Moses. And it sounds, I'll have to tell you, it sounds complicated. I mean, I'm having difficulty really understanding what you're saying. And I believe you made reference to 3 interpretations a moment ago. It seems to me that the simplest thing to do is well, just to accept the interpretation that I gave to you, which is that the law of Moses wasn't the Gentile Christians didn't need to keep the law of Moses.
That's amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I guess that's essentially it.
No. Well, if I were to use that argument, let's say, you know, preaching the cross of Christ is foolishness to those who are perishing. So I can simply say our state of faith is God came down, He died as a man for your sin, He resurrected that you can come into the kingdom. Versus you saying, let's say it's an atheist who believes in evolution. No, we came from monkeys. There's no X and Y link yet. We haven't found that. And they go on because there's really no proof of that. And I said, well, you can simply just believe this just because it's more simpler. And yet, let's say someone else comes and says they're Buddhist, right? And they say, no. My simple religion is you come to nirvana. You simply have to meditate, get into nirvana. And that's very simple. It's very, very simple. We leave the suffering. So it's even simpler than your faith. So my faith is true. So we can't take the argument that the simplest explanation necessarily means that it's truth.
And that was not my argument.
Okay, so then I think I misunderstood.
Well,
misunderstood that.
what it is that it is the simplest explanation is more, particularly in the absence of other considerations. The simpler explanation is more likely true. But to respond to your two examples, one reason I reject evolution is because it is not the simpler explanation. It is far more complicated. And also I would reject Buddhism because Buddhism seems very complicated to me. But anyway.
Can I respond
sure,
to your
sure.
view on the text of verse 14? Okay, a simpler thing would be the shortest verse, which is 15. We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles. Let's say you're right. Let's say while he was living with the Gentiles, he probably wasn't keeping kosher. He wasn't keeping the Sabbath. Maybe he was starting with other important laws like abstaining from idolatry or repenting from idolatry and sexual immorality, and trying to gradually, or maybe not at all, bring them to the law. But let's say that was the case. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, living like a Gentile is sinful, and the ways that they live is contrary to the law, contrary to Torah, contrary to God's standards. And that, whatever way he was living, because it doesn't specify, all we know is it says that he was living like the Gentiles. We do know he was being a hypocrite at the same time. That's a sin that's clearly seen. It doesn't say he was not eating kosher. It doesn't say he was breaking the Sabbath. But at the end of the day, it says that, we who are Jews by nature. And again, Paul says, what advantage does a Jew have? Much in every way. For we were given the oracles, the scripture, the foundation, for lack of terms. That's a paraphrase, probably horrible. But nonetheless, the Jews should have an advantage at knowing the statutes and the commandments and the moral standard of God. So I would kind of agree with you. I like common sense. I like to read the text as if, it should be able to make sense. You shouldn't have to manipulate too many things, to try to come up with an answer.
Good word used. But I would actually apply that, if I may make this observation. I'll try to keep it brief. But I would what I said about this text in particular, I would apply overall. When we look at all the arguments pro and con about keeping the law of Moses or particular parts of it, such as the Sabbath, what I'm hearing is that you're going to have to struggle. And we haven't looked at a lot of specific texts that we could look at, but you're going to have to struggle, Darionelle, to interpret them. And I think you're going to wind up with an ungainly or awkward interpretation. You're going to have to work with them to try to make all of them fit the idea that we can still keep the law of Moses, or should keep the law of Moses. So I think in the end, your belief is, to put it mildly, is going to wind up becoming too complicated. You're going to need to struggle to manipulate the scriptures to fit your belief. I would think it would, if I can say this generally and with all due respect, I think it would be simpler just to, may I put it this way, accept my view.
Well, I think so far, I've done a pretty good job. I think there's been a Hebraic explanation for most of the verses that have been brought up so far for why we shouldn't have to keep the law anymore. I think so far I've been bringing up some examples of, if you read it from a Jewish perspective or a Hebraic perspective, what was there is probably not understood as much as maybe we have been taught in modern day Christianity.
Well, I think you misrepresented the case, and again, I say that respectfully, in a couple of different ways. We really haven't looked at it, and it hasn't been my intention tonight
No.